I would like to briefly introduce the other panelists that are going to be with us. As there is Sarah Jane Ahmed, the financial advisor of the V20, Vulnerable 20, and maybe a wonderful good afternoon, or maybe even a good evening to you, Sara.
Yes, good evening. I am based in Manila in the Philippines.
Okay, so good evening, definitely. Thank you very much for hanging on. We're going to bring you into the discussion in a moment after I've introduced Fahad. And Fahad, are we not missing somebody?
Mr. Turki?
No, okay. There was a last-minute change. So, Fahad, thank you very much from the T20 process that you are with us, and we see sort of your core statement, striving for future prosperity, sustainability, and inclusion. Great that you are with us. So maybe I talk between you, Sara, and Fahad first, because we've already heard Nouf and Axel. Sara, we've yesterday heard the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, of course, saying that there are special interests of the V20 that have not been brought to bear. And of course, if we look at the structure of the G20, yes, India is in there, but then, of course, Bangladesh isn't, the Philippines aren't. So would you say that the voice of the vulnerable or more vulnerable states are too little heard, and how can you make them heard?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think you are, you hit the nail on the head, where we are seeing that generally, developing country voices are missing and or poorly represented when agendas are set and decisions are made. And so there's great appreciation for the F20 and the King Khalid Foundation, chair of the C20, for allowing the V20 as well to participate in this platform.
Very much. On the other hand, Fahad, of course, a representative, and we've just been talking to a scientist. The T20 has almost a side event that's happening in Berlin now with the Global Solutions Summit. But of course, it is the presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, so of course our focus should be there. What do you bring to the table to this discussion? What do you say? Maybe Foundations 20, you and us should sort of rub shoulders.
Hi, everybody, and good afternoon or good evening for everyone. And thank you for having us. Special thanks to Princess Nouf and the King Khalid Foundation for co-organizing this. We work closely with them as one of the engagement groups, as well as one of the foundation in Saudi Arabia. I want to, if you allow me, also respond to the question that you asked Sara in terms of the inclusion of non-G20 countries in the G20 process. If you look at the engagement groups, I think this is the main channel where non-G20 countries can be included and can be heard. If we take, for example, the T20, we have about 11 task forces that cover the priorities, our legacy priority from previous presidencies. So there is a continuity, and this is also to your question to Adam, how we maintain the continuity, as well as new issues that are related to the region or to the host country that we highlight. For example, in Japan last year, there was a lot of emphasis on aging population. This year, the T20 focuses on youth, and it is one of our priorities. So you see how the differences emerge within different presidencies. In terms of representation of non-G20 country, the T20 represent around 70 countries around the globe. 70 countries are participating. In the 11 task forces, we have about 700 authors that draft the policy briefs, and I'm glad to see Axel here. He's contributing to one of our policy briefs, or many, I guess. More than 500 leading think tanks from around the globe are contributing to the whole process. So we are a very inclusive engagement group that go beyond only the G20 countries. To your point in terms of the link between science and the G20, I think we view the T20 as a bridge to merge the two in terms of utilizing research, in particular some of academic research, and applying it into or translating it into policies or feasible solution that can be considered by the G20. I'm not aware of the event that is going on in Berlin now. Definitely, it's not a side event of the T20. But we have our summit season, T20 summit season. Starting from tomorrow, we will have our first workshop for Task Force 1 on trade and investment. Related to the climate, we will have our webinar next Tuesday. So next week, we will have the webinar on our Task Force 2, Climate Change and Environment, which is truly the largest task force. We have around 25 policy briefs that will be discussed next week that relate to climate challenges and environment. And we will continue with the webinars on 2 webinars per week up until our T20 summit, where we will submit the communique and the main recommendations of the T20, including climate-related recommendations by October 31st, November 1st.
Fahad, sorry to have caused slight confusion. The conference I was referring to is sort of one that has developed in parallel to the T20 meetings. And of course, the German presidency sponsored quite a number of things. So that conference is done and dusted. That was in April. But it was sort of when the presidency already sort of portrayed as a solution on the climate issue. The new idea sponsored by the Saudi government and of course by Kapsark, as we have just been learning again and a bit more in depth. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Stefan.
Yeah, just one question maybe to all of you, and I've already asked that question to Princess Nouf, and maybe all of you also feel encouraged to share some of your experiences with it, because as you said, Fahad rightly pointed out that all this work of course goes beyond the G20. If it wouldn't, the question then would be very much on how is the transmission between the hugely valuable content and the controversies and the discussions that you have on the T20 level with the subjects discussed being in 2 days by the G20 countries. I know there's a long process around the G20 towards this summit, and it's the different working groups that make use of this content. So it's not just these 2 days, but the question would be, of course, how is this been then really used? And it's good that you mentioned that this is content that is available for everyone. It's not just only for a decision-making process around the G20. My question, however, would be, what are the major controversies that you've experienced? Or are there any points where you said, you know, we just we still haven't solved those issues, but we will pose the different perspectives maybe towards the G20 or towards those who are familiar with the process. In particular, of course, with regard to the subjects that we are discussing here, are there any major controversies around implementation strategies of the Paris Climate Agreement or the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals?
You need to talk.
Maybe Fahad, you start, and then we hear from
Fahad,
Sara.
then Sara.
I think the main challenge is to find an approach that addresses climate challenges that will value all options, and in particular related to Paris Agreement. Solutions that should address all three main elements of the agreement, and in particular the mitigation, the adaptation, and the financing of all these solutions. We truly believe that if the solutions are not economically feasible or not sustainable, they will not be enough to address climate challenges. And that's where the role of the circular carbon economy comes in play, which was highlighted by both Axel and Adam, which values all options and encourages all efforts to reduce carbon accumulation in the atmosphere using the concepts of the 3 Rs. Reduce the amount of carbon entering the economy and the atmosphere, and reuse the carbon without chemical conversion, and recycle carbon with chemical conversion, and remove excess carbon from the atmosphere. So as a framework, this perfectly makes sense. But then again, there is the way toward that, which is using the advanced technology, as well as I think the main challenge is economically viable options, which will maintain a sustainable approach to climate challenges. I think this is the main element that is always in a discussion, but in the framework, it makes a perfect sense.
Very quickly, just the management of our discussion. We were so quickly into the discussion and into action that we almost skipped Sara's proper introduction. So we should give her some space. I also saw that, Axel, you were raising your hand. And my very quick question is your question, and please not or shake your head, is your remark a very short one and just related to something that Fahad said, or can that wait? It can wait. Fantastic. So, forgive me, Sara.
No worries at all. So I think I can give some context to the V20. So the vulnerable group of 20 ministers of finance, known as the V20, represent 48 developing economies across Asia Pacific, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The V20 presidency of the Philippines actually founded the V20 in 2015, and this was 2 months before the Paris COP. And the intention was to translate the political agenda into real economy progress. And so the presidency of the Philippines passed on to Ethiopia, followed by the Marshall Islands, and today the government of Bangladesh now chairs the V20 from 2020 to 2022. I'd like to highlight that hard-fought development gains are being undermined or reversed by the pandemic, creating a potentially deadly dynamic if the 1.5-degree limit of the Paris Agreement is breached. We have the cost-effective technology in the form of deflationary renewables and storage, green hydrogen, and grid upgrades to displace high-emitting, volatile, expensive, and economically harmful fossil fuels. Poor and vulnerable households are key drivers of growth in V20 countries, and today they are paying the price for more frequent and intense climate-induced impacts. So while the protection gap is improved across the world to 70%, progress has been at a much slower pace in developing countries, with an over 90% protection gap persisting. And while analytics point to the fact that resources are not correlating to where science and practice indicates vulnerabilities is located, this is a great opportunity to actually become more effective with support. So under the V20 presidency of Bangladesh, collaboration with the G20 is a priority, including building on the existing G20 and V20 Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, currently co-chaired by Germany and the Marshall Islands, which just had its high-level meeting this morning on addressing the 90% protection gap in developing countries. Similar partnerships between the G20 and the V20 can be established as we look to transform the economic and financial system. So pricing climate and sustainability in products and services and decisive leadership by the V20 and the G20 together to shift the market structure and economies towards a low carbon and climate resilient future will be key really to the ability of all governments and the private sector to successfully navigate this economic transition. So thank you for letting me introduce the V20.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought I'd sort of pointed my question at that, but quite obviously it seemed a bit more targeted. Thank you very much, Sara, for adding that information. Can I just go back to something that Nouf, Princess Nouf has said at the beginning, and therefore addressing her in the role of the C20. You were actually mentioning in between, we need to insist. Each country needs to sort of clean up their NDCs. There need to be consequences for non-compliance to promises made. Those are obvious and still strong demands. Do you feel that they're not embodied enough in the G20 process, so that we do actually need this C20 process saying, come on, guys, get your act in order. You have already committed to this, that, and the other. Now do it.
Thank you, Connie. Well, yes. Going back to also what Dr. Fahad said and the G20 and the controversies, the G20 is an exclusive club, really, and decisions aren't quite clear to us on how they're made. And as C20, we have similar numbers to Dr. Fahad. So we're inclusive, we're non-government, we're non-business. We have over 850 members and also from 80 countries. And the biggest working group we have of the 11 is a climate and environment and sustainability work group. So it shows you the interest, and our policy papers that are out, our policy pack, have been looked at, contributed by all the members. And so we do find gaps that, first of all, the Global South and the vulnerable groups, island states, are not being taken, not part of the discussion. Mm-hmm. So how can you make decisions that affect mostly, and most of the effects that we are feeling now in the world are taking place in these vulnerable societies and communities. There are gaps also that we have to talk about when we talk about the effect of climate on migration, the effect of climate on gender. This is information we don't have, and in order for the G20 to play its relevant role, which it must play, I mean, we've seen how they came together during the Ebola crisis. It needs to be more open, more inclusive in all their working groups, and bring in the voices of these countries. And then the transparency again as to where the financial flows are going. Are they going to fossil-intensive companies, or to not, I don't know how to word it properly in English, but non-compliant. Where are these subsidies going? Are the finances and the aids going to the real economy, or are they going to just save the big companies and keep us going on and continuing in this circle? And we do have solutions. We've seen it here. The engagement groups work very well together. We give our advice. We've had a wonderful engagement groups that are open to collaboration, and we've had the honor of endorsing or having the groups endorse two joint statements that talk to the pandemic preparedness, employment, and education. And within those, there are recommendations, and we can do more of that, and our voices need to be amplified. And one last thing is that and advocacy, all these groups, we need to advocate together. We need to advocate in our individual countries, and we need to put our advocacy in context and the solutions in context. We're not sure that the solutions are relevant to context relevant, I would say.
Well, thank you very much, both to Nouf and to Sara. Axel, I'd asked you to step back earlier, so maybe you would like to pick up on that point, if it makes sense, but maybe also looking at your presentation or thinking back to your presentation, you were actually pointing out to the different interest groups and their perspectives. So maybe you would like to pick up the ball from there.
Yes, thank you very much. That was exactly what I would like to come from. If one has this universe of engagement groups, and there is, of course, a mirror structure of this in the context of the international climate policy regime with the so-called constituencies, I've seen over the years that each of these groups somehow lives in its own universe. And I'm really thankful to F20 to having set up this event here to discuss how the various groups could collaborate more closely. Because I think that each of the group can contribute a specific part of the solution. And much too often the groups are pinned as being opposing each other, that business is structurally always against civil society and so on, which is stupid, because I think the best solutions come only when all the groups work together. And I would really hope that now for the remainder of the Saudi presidency, this combined strength of groups can be harnessed, and that it, of course, could then also feed into the longer-term development of solutions. Because much too often a solution is developed in isolation, and the power of the various perspectives is not brought in. And therefore, I would really hope that this collaborative spirit develops further.
Thank you so much, Axel, for sort of giving us the big umbrella. Fahad, please forgive me if I don't ask you right now, but Nouf, we sort of have, me as a sort of independent journalist at the Foundations 20 are having their summit, certainly on the climate issue now. They're going to sort of put together some recommendations, and of course, some of the spirit of your statements are going to sort of be part and parcel of it. You, the C20, are going to have your summit in the beginning of October. Axel's statement saying there shouldn't be too many strings, and therefore maybe the poor old G20, no, don't worry, I don't mean it, but you know, they would have to read about 10 different papers from 10 different groups that are accompanying the G20 process. Is there a more slimline approach possible in your thinking, or do you think it is actually necessary to keep the C20 to itself, the V20 to itself, and then maybe just say, look, you, the G20, just sort of think about it? You have to unmute yourself, sorry. You've just muted.
Sorry.
There you are, there you are.
I mean, we do have different entrants and different concerns. So I think what we need to do is really amplify the voices. We do work well together, and we need to come to where we can actually do that. We need civil society needs to amplify their voices everywhere. We're a force for change, for good change, and we value and we only work off evidence-based solutions. We have topic experts, and no, we don't need to make streamline the engagement groups. I mean, within our engagement groups, we have 11 policy papers out there. T20 will probably have more also. But we need to see where we work together. It's the same as, you know, being inclusive of all these different dimensions, and we represent different sectors also. Okay. So no, we just need to not work in silos, as everybody has said. We need to work in a way where it's only the person, not only the person that's interested opens the door or looks in from the top. No, that can't work. And within the C20, within the working groups, we work, there are cross-cutting issues, and everybody sees all the policy packs and contributes. So we have found in the C20 how to be inclusive, and I'm sure it's the same. And we just need more of that. We need more of advocacy within the G20, within G7, within each individual country.
Thank you so much for that clarification. And with that, Stefan.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to thank to your statements, and it refers to how I understand the role of such a group like the Foundations 20. I mean, it's a mission-led project. It clearly has these focus areas, but basically understanding that foundations can be of very different kind. They can have their background in the business, they can have their background in science, they can have their background in civil society. We don't really, as foundations, fit into one of those particular I shouldn't say silos, but into one of these particular groups, which is why we understood it's actually our role to build those bridges between those, or we can help to build those bridges. Mm-hmm. Not saying that not everyone else in the different engagement groups is also trying to build bridges, but as a Foundations 20 group, we really have this in our mission that we want to help cross-sectoral thinking and really build those bridges between the different stakeholder groups. And at least it bears mentioning that there are a number of engagement groups that are not here with us today, but that also exist and have a particular interest, be it the business or be it the Urban 20. We heard this morning from Sonia Medina the particular role of really tailoring solutions to the conditions on the ground. There is no one-size-fits-all solution from one country to another country. Every country has particular interests and particular situations and point of departures. Mm. So, and so does every city. So the urban perspective, which in that sense is not actually really represented in the G20 group, as this is national countries, right? These urban perspectives is also extremely relevant, and they are actually really busy implementing those solutions that ultimately come from this international level. So yes, that's what we exactly trying in really connect those different sectors as far as we can as the F20 group, and then really help to stimulate further discussions that we had maybe in Argentina with the presidency in 2018 or last year in Japan, and really help to build on what was discussed in the different engagement groups in previous years. Mm-hmm.
Maybe not now, because I would like to sort of go a bit more in depth into sort of shaping the different positions where you come from, and also how you could cooperate with Foundations 20. But towards the end, I would sort of wrap it up with your wish list, like what should Foundations 20 sort of think or take into consideration from your perspective when we write or put out the recommendations. So maybe Sara, when you mentioned, Stefan, the C20, urban and sort of looking at the ground, what's the situation? Every situation is different. That must ring a strong bell with you, Sara.
Yes, certainly. Across the V20 membership, we have 48 member states, small island developing states, larger economies such as Bangladesh, the Philippines, and Ethiopia. And so what we're seeing is, of course, the fiscal effort is very different considering the COVID-19 crisis. The differences in the collapse of the GDP certainly varies, and this does mean that there must be tailored solutions to deal with the different types of realities. The other thing I'd like to highlight is a lot of the support that we're seeing really targets larger economies and larger constituencies, which means it's an economies of scale game with a lot of climate finance and development finance, and there must be a way to target better small island developing states as well as smaller communities that are most vulnerable and more vulnerable and are increasingly dealing with the long-term climate-related risks such as drought and pest infestation. And so part of the priority or the V20 agenda, while it's straightforward to catalyze an economic transformation among member states, there's a key priority which includes enabling micro, small, medium-sized enterprises. And the reason for this is while contributing up to 30% of GDP, 80% of the workforce, most of which are poor and vulnerable, are part of the MSME system. And so part of the agenda is to protect and enable the growth of these. We're also recognizing that the financial protection agenda is weak. And so this G20, V20 collaboration, the Inter-Resilience Global Partnership, is a multi-stakeholder partnership. It does include civil society and think tanks as part of the high-level board. And we are seeing that this has made some progress. The goal is to protect 500 million poor and vulnerable by 2025. And I think more collaborative spaces with the G20, V20, T20, and C20. And what I would like to put on the table is why not starting 2020 and achievable by 2025 or earlier, we should and we can demonstrate together that economic growth and stability can be enhanced even while doing more to tackle the threats of climate change to the economy and the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe Fahad, are you in a position of maybe as representing the T20 having a closer eye to the G20 simply because your members, all the think tanks all around the world, are there anyway to advise governments? Or other organizations, but quite a lot of them are actually advising their governments. So it seems that you're in a slightly more privileged situation.
Well, let me comment on the collaboration and cooperation between different engagement groups. I think what we've seen under the Saudi presidency is, I think, one step forward in terms of aligning different engagement groups to share recommendations and thoughts on cross-cutting issues that are highlighted under each of the engagement groups. We've seen different engagement groups participate in other engagement groups events and activities. Not only participation in events, but also contributing to the policy recommendations. So for the T20, we have a number of authors, a number of think tanks, also participating in other engagement groups, be it the sea, be it the urban, and so on. Of course, it's not institutionalized, and I think it is. It shouldn't be institutionalized because different engagement groups have different mandates, and this diversity contribute to the process. In terms of engaging with the G20, Of course, we have been impacted by COVID-19. The meetings with other working groups at the G20 level have been shortened in time because, as you probably aware, virtual meetings usually significantly shorter than in-person meeting. So the time that was allocated to all engagement groups also narrowed. But what we rely on is through issuing statements. For example, T20 this year have issued nearly 15 statements. Some of them are endorsed and also jointly issued with other engagement groups. Previously, we used to attend the meetings of the working groups and so on, but the difficulty under COVID is making it hard. Yet we see the G20 is very recipient to the recommendations that are coming from the T20, and I assume it's the same for other engagement groups. And we will host our webinars, summit season webinars for the T20 starting from tomorrow, where we invite the relevant working groups to come and listen to the details of the recommendations from the think tank community, not representing not only G20 countries, but also other non-G20 countries. And then by the end of these webinars in November 1st, we will have the summary of all the recommendations submitted to the G20. So our engagement continues with the G20, but of course, like many other businesses and engagement groups, COVID-19 had a major impact on the level of communication.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, of course, we've all experienced this not face-to-face difficulty. On the other hand, when you do or host a conference, I suppose you actually have access to many more people because they don't have to travel, and therefore you can actually get them. Very quick on the way to Stefan, just on the V20 and the C20. Did you find that through COVID-19, i.e. if you take the positive aspect, that you actually get people together faster, more efficient, i.e. not have to travel? Just a brief interlude. Nouf, maybe. Unmute.
Sorry.
No worries.
As much as it's been a bit disruptive, our steering committee and our international advisory committee are all over the world. And we have been able to meet, and indeed we used to meet before any summit online all the time. It's not like meeting in person. Our face-to-face, of course, was virtual, but it has allowed us to work more efficiently and more ecologically sound. What COVID-19 has also done is it has allowed for true participation of different communities that were probably unable to travel and come. So it's made it a bit more egalitarian. So for us, I just see the good that this has done and has enabled us to work in a different way without losing any efficiency.
Oh, thank you for sharing that experience. And I know it's a sort of intermediate or interlude question. Sara, what was your experience in the last half year?
So historically, the V20 members, senior officials and ministers would meet in person. And so this has certainly changed things, I think, for the better, just because as Princess Nouf pointed out, we do have countries that it would take, if we're meeting in DC, it sometimes takes more than 24 hours to get to DC, and having them available online has been much better. But generally, of course, we run into the time zone problem. And so in any case, I think generally this is a good shift, and we're seeing more collaborative space and opportunities as a benefit to this strange situation we are all in.
Thank you again. This was sort of, just sort of feeling the temperature, so to say. And Stefan, the next step.
Yeah, no, what I was just thinking about the next step maybe is what is our lessons learned from that discussion? Actually, I find this discussion extremely interesting and extremely insightful, although it seems to be a little bit of a rocky ride. But the reason for that is because I think there is really room for improvement in terms of how we organize as different engagement groups, and how do we make sure that the content that has been generated, that is so valuable, is been really translated into actionable, clearly actionable points, and then really referred to the G20 decision-making process. My sense is that there is definitely some room for improvement. So in terms of the two areas that we were discussing here, the subjects, the what, and the how, the process, I think there is more commonalities in the subjects in terms of we agreeing that the UN framework should serve as the guiding principle for the G20. We've heard it from Adam this morning.
Do I get nods there? Hold on. You're just sort of saying that. Do I get at least nods to this statement?
Yes. As far as I was, and I was listening carefully, everyone was in one way or the other referring to the frameworks coming from the United Nations, like the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, as sort of an important framework from the United Nations. And we also heard from Adam in the beginning of the session that new concepts like the circular carbon economy should be tied to the benchmarks formulated in the Paris Agreement. So there is a lot of references to that. So my sense is there is a lot of commonalities between these different sectors. But I think in terms of the process, how do we really make ourselves heard as business, as civil society, as youth, as women, as think tanks, and as cities? There's a lot of room for improvement. That's my personal sense. You don't necessarily have to agree with it, but that's my personal sense. And I would love to just devote the next minutes maybe to just hear a bit about how could we really improve the process in terms of really getting this to the G20, feeding the decision-making process that leads ultimately to the summit of the G20. How do we improve this process, and how do we improve cooperation between the different engagement groups? Axel, I know you best, so I dare putting you on the spot now and putting this question to you maybe. And then I'd love to hear thoughts from Fahad and from Sara and from Princess Nouf maybe.
Well, I think that, of course, there are some of the engagement groups that are structurally close to each other and others that are a bit less close. It's clear that, for example, science and think tanks, they collaborate in daily practice. Yeah. Also, of course, you have youth and civil society running in the same direction very frequently. And then there are the others that may be structurally more difficult to collaborate. For example, business and civil society, at least traditionally, often has been seen as having antagonistic relations. But we've seen, for example, from UNFCCC, and I would like to use the example from UNFCCC because it's fairly similar, that there are the different constituencies / engagement groups have been able to feed into the process much more strongly over the years. Whereas, let's say, initially there were certain constituencies that had direct access to the highest level. And I think, of course, we cannot now gloss over the difference in resources that the different engagement groups have. It's clear that companies or businesses will always have direct access to high levels of decision making, whereas for youth it is structurally always very difficult. But that each group builds on its strength, and then there must be transversal processes where the group exchange and forge coalitions to ensure that eventually the decision-making level listens to what they say. Of course, not always then takes it fully into account, but at least it is brought into the process. And here, again, of course, there are catalysts like F20 who can do it. I also would like to commend the G20 process, which was very well organized in harnessing a broad input, and that now feeds into the summit. These are some examples, but of course, I would say in the future, these catalytic events probably need to play a bigger role.
Sara, your views.
Yes, thank you. And I definitely agree with Axel. I think that there are successful collaborative models already that we can build on, and there are these collaborative platforms such as this that we can engage on, just because I do think that think tanks, civil society can and do already for the most part, especially in vulnerable developing countries, do inform in terms of, we know that techno-economic change typically overruns government regulation, and we see think tanks and civil society ensure that there is information transfer on this, so that economic and financial decisions, planning decisions are made to take this into consideration. And more of that cross-engagement is certainly helpful, especially with resource-strapped countries and populations. So I think moving forward, we shouldn't stop here, and we should ensure that we continue this engagement and try to interface as much as possible with the many priorities of each of the groups, because I'm certain that they feed into each other, such as the recovery packages. Looking for an economic transformation through these packages to yield positive welfare effects for vulnerable communities. That is a goal of, or a priority as well as the V20, and I imagine it's a similar priority for the C20, for example. Thank you.
Nouf or Fahad, who wants to take it away now? Don't be too polite. Yes, Nouf, thank you. Princess Nouf.
Well, I think just towards what everybody else was saying, the C20, I think, is a very good example. C20, we understand very well, as everybody, that this is not about one country or about, this is a global forum where we come together. Our governing bodies are regionally balanced and gender balanced. And we have different interests. We have specialists in finance, we have infrastructure, we have climate, we have health. So we have different interests in our steering committee and our international advisory committee, and from different backgrounds, but we have come together and worked together very well, collaboratively, it's consensus-based, and we've come out with really good results, where it's a fantastic model to follow. Let's say our club is open to all. We work well within our groups, and this is something I think we can do, in the G20 would do well to do, is within their working groups to have cross dialogue. So when they come up with policies, it is inclusive. And the other thing, again, is we can no longer be proxies for other people, or talk about what other people's needs are. I can't sit here in Riyadh, and you can't sit in Germany, and we can't sit here and discuss what we think Fiji or the Philippines needs. and people there know what they need, and we cannot blame systems that are not working in those countries, and we cannot act for them or decide for them. So I think this is an important thing we need to keep in mind.
Stefan, but Fahad hasn't given us his view yet.
Fahad, you go first. You definitely go first.
This is, I think, this is a brilliant question and a very fundamental question to the G20 process across countries. And if I may, I would break it into three main categories or dimensions. One, well, the question is how to make engagement groups more effective in the process of the G20. So one dimension is engagement group specific issues, and another, which Axel elegantly explained, and I completely agree with his view in terms of across engagement groups. And then the third dimension is how the G20 is seeing the engagement of the engagement groups in the process. So if I start with the first one, it differs between different engagement groups, but in general, one of the most difficult elements of it is finding, it's a huge task, so finding the financing for it is going to be an important in terms of the engagement group carrying their mandates. Another dimension within that category, where is specific to the engagement groups, is the continuity. We've seen many countries delay naming the leading institutions and leading the engagement groups. And this undermines the process. So, for example, in both Japan and Argentina, as well as in Saudi Arabia and Italy, naming the leading institution for different engagement groups happens in the second half of the year. And that put the leading institution under a lot of pressure to carry on. And makes the Troika process less effective. So, for example, in Italy, it was only named a few months ago, when it should have been early in the year, so they can work through the process with the Saudi as part of the Troika. So there are many challenges related to the engagement groups themselves, and I've just mentioned two, but there are many. And then Axel mentioned the cross-group collaboration, which I agree with. And then related to the G20 and how the G20 sees the different engagement groups, I think in Saudi Arabia, we've seen, despite the pandemic, we've seen an open door for the meetings, for the direct discussion with different working groups. We've seen participation in our events, conveying what the priorities for the G20 and listening to what the engagement groups is recommending. And hopefully by the end of the process, we will see many of these recommendations carry on. For example, in the March or April extraordinary summit that was held virtually under the G20 Saudi Arabia presidency, the engagement groups issued a statement, a joint statement. It was initiated by Princess Nouf and the C20. And we went through a number of rotation for the recommendations, and then we issued the statement with particular recommendations related to how countries cope with the implications of COVID-19 and what are the needs to shield the economy and the society from the implications of the pandemic. Many of the recommendations were adopted in the final statement of the leaders. So from this experience, I think there is a good engagement between the G20 and the engagement groups. And I think if it continues moving forward, it will strengthen the position of the engagement groups and also invite other unofficial engagement groups to establish an official status under the G20.
Well, thank you very much, Fahad, for that in-depth answer. And I know that Stefan is gearing up to sort of put something in. Can I already sort of give you a heads up? After Stefan, we would like to sort of come to a final round, but I would like to encourage you to put forward those aspects that you think the Foundations 20 should take into consideration from your perspective whilst formulating recommendations. That would be very nice. So this was the heads up, and now Stefan.
Yeah, nothing much really. I think I have to say, Connie, I was a bit surprised about how this discussion went. And I'm actually very positively surprised, because there is an issue about increasing the efficiency of the process.
Yeah.
And this was meant to be a session where we heard sort of the different, calls and recommendations from the different engagement groups. We did this, and we certainly discussed a number of those subjects. And there's more to say about this, but there was really sort of an elephant in the room, which I had the sense, which was the process. So in terms of how do we increase the efficiency, as Fahad put it, of the different engagement groups, and there were a clear indication that where they have been working successfully together in terms of joint statements, some of this content then ended up in the concluding remarks from the G20, and ended up in the policies that were highlighted in the concluding documents. So one thought that I have then, or one discussion that comes up in this is, of course, is there a need for more strategic collaboration meetings or channels or groups where the different stakeholder groups really have the chance to not just formulate a one-page statement, which is already, as we've heard from Fahad, which can be very powerful, but really how to navigate the different backgrounds, the different point of departures, and then really come to joint recommendations. I think this would be really an important step to take, and that's my lessons learned from this really very insightful discussion, I have to say.
As I said, we have this last round in which I would encourage you to sort of point out what everybody needs to think along from your perspective as engagement rooms, and that sort of prices in Stefan's question right now. Can I just say that in the chat we had a couple of questions that were more or less directed to Axel on the technical aspect, but I really don't want to bring that into our discussion now. So maybe Axel, could you and this gentleman who's being asking the questions, called Keith, maybe meet up in the discussion room? Normally, when you have a presence thing, then you can always say the two of you can meet for a coffee afterwards. I can't provide the coffee, but we can provide the room. So maybe the two of you are hooking up on this issue. So basic question, wish list. No, there is no fairy in the room that can fulfill it, but what needs to be done? What's your wish about collaboration between the groups, or what should the Foundations 20 think and calculate in when they put forward their recommendations? So maybe Sara.
Thank you. I'll take the first step. So I think the bottom line for the V20 is really building on development gains and economic growth. And we know that business as usual and our trajectory now and prior to COVID-19 did not allow for that and does not enable that. And so I think part of the wish list is to ensure that we collaborate as much as possible, and the G20 has a large role to play here because of the seats that they have in the multilateral development banks, at the World Bank, at the IMF. We need to catalyze these investments that actually lead to an economic transformation that does translate Paris into economic progress, while ensuring, and this is the only way we get to build on development gains and economic growth, that the Sustainable Development Goals are achieved. And so that is point number one, and I have just a couple more. The other thing to note is the vulnerable country viewpoint and reality is different even across the 48 members, and a majority of the members already pay 10% more on the cost of capital due to climate vulnerability. And so overcoming cost of capital constraints must happen, because currently it's dampening climate action and ambition, because it means it's expensive to actually invest in high upfront cost projects such as renewable energy and adaptation infrastructure, even though over the long run it will deliver far more economic and development outcomes. So this is something I'd also like to point out. The third thing is we need to expand the climate finance architecture and actually broaden the menu of tools, including making better use of capital markets and looking beyond business as usual debt instruments. And I think learning as well and utilizing, for example, fundamental Islamic finance is an option here, and then various other types of instruments that we can bring to really suit the conditions of vulnerable developing countries is key. And it's not going to be the same in each country. There will be regional needs that need to be taken into consideration, such as specifically for the small island developing states, where we will not have economies of scale. So there must be some way to target them more appropriately. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm torn as between Fahad and Nouf. Last time I said Nouf, so I say Fahad now. You're still muted. Thank you.
Yes. Look, in terms of our wish list, I don't want to steal the thunder of my colleagues who are having their webinars with their specific recommendations being announced starting from tomorrow and next Tuesday on climate and climate-related issues. And it will be definitely made available for everybody. And we do have our 25 policy briefs for climate change and environment task forces already in our website. Our wish list is extensive in all field that we participated in or we highlighted as a task force. Around 150 policy briefs that are going to be rolled over until the end of October on a sequence of webinars. But I think if I want to say something about the process and the engagement and what the foundation can do. I think it's important to this webinar is perfect to engage and so on. And I think early in the process, it could facilitate discussion between different engagement groups to make sure that engagement groups are aligned with cross-cutting topics that they cover, and that will translate into more powerful recommendations to the G20 that will probably have more chances of being adopted and gain more consensus among the G20 leaders. So our wish list is coming in the series of our webinars, and I think we'll focus more on communication between engagement groups, and I think that's what is definitely needed.
Thank you very much. Princess Nouf, C20. Again, the stupid Zoom thing with unmuting, and it's very kind of all of you to have muted yourself in between. So, Princess, please.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Fahad as the chair of G20, and also the other chairs that aren't with us today, to their openness and willingness to collaborate. 2 points. With regards to the G20, I think it's important to know that it's not only with the presidency that we need to advocate. So each country needs to reach out to their Sherpas, to their working group leads, to their ministers, and to start the work from there. We have legacy issues. It won't stop November 20th, 22nd. It is a continuation. As for our wish list, I have no problem saying a few of them. I will not speak to technicalities, but the main issue is that we would really like to see that the G20 open up to civil society. They have great collaboration with the big IOs and different organizations, but really they need to bring civil society, topic expert, people that work on the ground, understand the context to the table. The second thing is also is that we really need the G20, even within the engagement groups, we need to be engaged with the most vulnerable. They can speak for themselves. They know what they need. They know the developmental issues they have. They know the climate dangers they face, the environmental dangers they face. They can speak for themselves. And the last thing, I think the industrial nations need to bear the burden of our home, of what has happened to Earth, and any remedies for this need to be equitably distributed. We cannot go to, and this has been said many times, and even within the G20, to developing nations and demand of them to do what an industrialized nation does. So support needs to be equitable, and the people most that contributed to the state we're in need to bear the burden of the costs.
Thank you very much for that statement. Axel, of course, not belonging to, in this context, one of the engagement groups, but maybe sort of serving as an eagle. I would just open the microphone for you for a last statement.
Yeah, thank you. I think a crucial role belongs to the gatekeeper institutions, and we have some of them with us, like CAPSARC in the G20 process. And of course, the way these gatekeeper institutions work for each of the engagement groups is decisive for the way the new ideas are actually channeled to the decision makers. And I think the G20 process was very nice in that context. Of course, civil society has also a lot of experience with this process. But yeah, this upward channeling and condensing of valuable ideas, and also not losing the forest because you look at each tree, that's very important.
Even
another aspect, of course,
planting is a very important issue.
Yeah, what is also, of course, then important is to understand the feedback loop with the decision makers. Are we just calling upwards and there is no reactivity? How do we gauge this? Is there an interaction process that can really be harnessed? Again, I use the example of UNFCCC, where there has been a very good process now of interaction between the chairs of the conferences of the parties, the chairs of the subsidiary bodies with the various engagement groups. And I think there the G20 process may learn from the UNFC process. Last but not least, of course, and I heard Princess Nouf what we were saying about industrialized countries and burden sharing. Yeah, there are, of course, difficult issues, elephants in the room, like finance, burden sharing, and so on. We need to be conscient of what can be done at the G20 level and what cannot be done. Not, let's say, waste the windows of opportunity. And of course, I understand that, of course, civil society needs to raise the voice on certain issues. Also, business raises their voice anyway. We as researchers need to state what we think is based on sound science and whatnot. But that we, again, don't lose opportunity because we want to achieve too many things at the same time.
Thank you so much, Axel. Oh, Fahad, yes, saw your hand.
I just one minor comment. CAPSARC is one of the leading institutions for the T20, but we have our colleagues also from King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies, which is the co-leading institution for the T20. And they're doing a great job in terms of contributing to the process. So I felt I have to say this because it was mentioned CAPSARC multiple times, and I want to be fair to our other co-leading institution.
Thank you. Well noted. Thank you for getting that. We wish all of you who still are in the process of having these conferences during the presidency of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we wish all your conferences, Princess Nouf, Fahad and Sara, maybe also a lot of success. We know how difficult it is to actually get everybody together online, but it is the best we have, and actually we should just look at it and making things work. And I just sort of look at Stefan, and he has been sort of putting on two different hats, one as a co-moderator and one, of course, as the secretary of the Foundation's 20 Climate Solutions Week, and of course of the Foundation's 20, much more importantly. So can I just sort of address you for a last word in the context of your proper job, not as a co-moderator?
You mean in terms of the Foundation's 20 role, or in
yes,
terms of?
yes.
No, I think we really touched upon very important points in this discussion in terms of how do we collaborate in the future, how do we ensure that all this mining of content and development of new ideas has been really translated into actionable, very clear activities and policies and processes at the G20 level. I particularly liked the fact that I think, Fahad, you alluded to it in your third point in terms of the process of the engagement groups. You mentioned the issue of continuity, not trying to reinvent the wheel every year, but really building on the content that we have developed so far. I see a lot of opportunities in improving the process and bringing the different points together, bringing the different engagement groups together. So that's something that I also consider as sort of a catalog of opportunities that we from the Foundation's 20 platform will be looking into, and we will see where our opportunities are in really improving and helping this process. So that's all I can say for that.
And with that, I would like to thank everybody for their time. Axel, for quickly sort of giving us that one more hour of your time. Princess Nouf, Sara, I hope that you can go to bed soon in Manila. And Fahad, for your contributions. We know that a lot of things are going on right at the moment in Riyadh. So to everybody who was there, and again, we wish you a lot of energy for the challenges that you are meeting within your context, and also for everything that we've said. The common goal is make mankind survive on this globe and survive in a humane fashion. I think that is probably the umbrella looking from the moon. And thank you to those. And now we here will look at what is actually happening tomorrow, because tomorrow morning we are not going to be online.
Yeah, maybe You just closed this so nicely, but you were referring in the first part to the moon, because you were hearing that song, and then you said that this image of the fragile world really changed our mind. I could not more agree with you, and maybe closing the circle, speaking about the role of the industrialized countries and the importance that industrialized countries exhibit leadership and take responsibility. We just heard this morning that at least the European Union is willing to increase their climate targets. And that is something that in combination with the Green Deal has been described as the man to the moon project. So there you go. We have still this image around us, and we see that this is actually subject of those discussions. So tomorrow we're going to have again an extremely exciting discussion with representatives from the foundations communities from different parts of the world. We start with Fadi Jamil from the Community Jamil Foundation. For people in the Arab world, this is a big name, and maybe for people abroad as well. So we're really much looking forward to welcoming Fadi. And we have Joanna Messing from the Grow World Family Fund also sharing her insights with us. And then we have different representatives from the foundations looking into the discussions that we had, and we will conclude with the recommendations that Foundations 20 has been developing over the last months in different working groups, and in particular, of course, in this 3.5 days. The discussions were extremely insightful, very rich, very concrete in many parts in terms of what we would expect from the G20 with regard to the mission of the Foundations 20 platform. So we're going to introduce those recommendations and summarize those recommendations tomorrow after hearing to many representatives of our members and of foundations from all parts of the world.
And just for those who might not have looked at the schedule, tomorrow morning, no broadcast from our Climate Solutions Week studio. Tomorrow afternoon, that is at 1 o'clock, we're going to have exactly that program, and then wrap it all up by 3 o'clock, and we'll have covered a lot of ground. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today. Again, the invitation is out there. Join us again tomorrow. Otherwise, do have a great and productive day wherever you are, or a wonderful sleep if you're already sort of direction Beijing, Manila. I think the end of the day will be there for you. That's it. That's it from us for today. The F20 Climate Solutions Week studio closes for now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Khalid.